Hello and welcome back to the consistory of the coelc YouTube channel. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Zabel of St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia. And today we're continuing through my Bible study series on the 10 plagues with the third plague, the plague of gnats, or of lice. We're going to discuss that in a moment, why there are, different wordings. But from the text, Exodus 8 verses 16 through to 19, Then the Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth, so that it may become gnats in all the land of Egypt. And they did so, and Aaron stretched out his hand with his staff and struck the dust of the earth, and there were gnats on man and on beast, and on all the dust of the earth, which became gnats in the land of Egypt. And the magicians tried by their secret arts to produce gnats, but they could not. So there were gnats on man and on beast. Then the magician said to Pharaoh, This is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. So the question first up is whether they're gnats or lice. In most modern translations you'll see gnats, and this is done for several reasons. One, the plague of gnats is actually referred to as a she or a her in the Hebrew, and it's only the female gnat that bites. And secondly, there are those liberal theologians who like to try and give a more natural explanation to these plagues, and there's already gnat plagues that happen every year in Egypt. However, the gnat is probably the least common translation. It's not unprecedented. The Greek Septuagint did translate the Hebrew into the Greek word for gnat. However, this is historically the least common translation. The King James Version and many Old English translations translated the Hebrew as lice, as did Luther in his German Bible, and also the ancient Latin Vulgate of St. Jerome and the 2nd century Syriac Peshitta also translated them as lice, as did the 1st century Jewish historian Josephus when in his History of the Jews he talks about the plagues. He doesn't use the Greek for gnats like the Septuagint did, he uses the Greek for lice. There's also an early century, early 2nd century text known as the Targum Oculus. This is an Aramaic translation of the first 5 books of the Bible, the 5 books of Moses. And again, it uses the Aramaic word for lice. John Calvin in the 16th century, he even mentions this gnat lice debate, saying that the Jews can't agree amongst themselves. In fact, the Hebrew word can be translated multiple different ways. Sometimes gnats, sometimes lice, sometimes horseflies, sandflies, mosquitoes, and in some places even as maggots. Now, when we get to the god at hand though, most scholars have associated this plague with the god Geb, who's the god of the earth, because the gnats come out of the dust. Because he's not just the god of the dust and the dirt, he's particularly with all the good things that come out of the earth. So it's kind of God's way of saying, look, you think the earth gives you good things? No, here come have some bad things, and trying to turn the Egyptians away from the god Geb. It's kind of like, you guys trusted in the earth? Well, look what the earth did for you. It sent you lice. One interesting thing about this plague is that the magicians can't copy it. Previously, the magicians were allowed to replicate the plagues. God allowed them to do so, but here they can't. Basically, God has said, no more. And we probably wonder why it is. Well, the thing is, God is using these plagues to harden the heart of Pharaoh to bring about the liberation of his people. With the first plague, Pharaoh saw the magicians copy it and went, yep, I'm going to harden my heart and not believe because my magicians can do the same. Here God is achieving the same purpose by not letting the magicians do the same. And this is what I think is like God does throughout the Psalms multiple times, where he sets traps for people to lure people into a false sense of security. He let the magicians do their demonic arts to begin with, just so they got kind of confident, just to pull the rug out from under them. We see this in throughout the Psalms all over the place, but Psalm 73 is one that comes to mind for me. There Asaph bemoans the prosperity of the wicked, but in verses 18 and 19 he mentions how these riches are actually a trap from God, that God uses this as a slippery slope so that their riches will be snatched away from them. So God lulls people into a false sense of security. And we see that Pharaoh's heart is hardened by this, that he's kind of lulled into this false sense of security. And God uses this circumstance now to actually bring about a confession of faith. See, just as God used the pagan Gentile magician Balaam to curse the Moabites and bless the Israelites, he's going to use the pagan magicians of Egypt to proclaim his sovereignty and to shame the gods of Egypt. Because the magicians come to Pharaoh trying to convince him to give in to Moses by saying, this isn't just sorcery. We can't do this. This is the work of an all-powerful God. And Pharaoh doesn't listen. He hardens his heart and it eventually leads to his downfall. I say it's somewhat similar to the case of Haman, his wife and advisors told him not to mess with Mordecai and the Jewish people. He wouldn't listen to them, and it led to his ultimate downfall. And that's kind of the end of our Bible study for today. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.